Are Chinese EV manufacturers, specifically BYD, going to flood the United States with cheap, subsidized electric vehicles? Well, not if you look at how they've been expanding worldwide. Welcome back to All Cars, y'all. If you're new here, my name is John, and there was an excellent article this morning by Reuters about BYD's expansion around the world and whether it's showing an intent to flood those markets with really cheap EVs. China has developed a reputation for having some incredibly affordable EVs. I've done at least one here looking at a cool little station wagon, and there's rumors flowing that they're going to be able to come here with a $15,000 vehicle and undercut everybody. Politicians are calling for outright bans on Chinese vehicles, and business leaders are also warning that it's going to be an absolute catastrophe for the American automobile industry. Another coming of the Japanese, but far, far worse, backed by the Chinese government and the massive subsidies they give. So there's a couple of things to unpack here. And the first is, I will say up front that there's a concern about China, its government, and how they use data. They've actually said in the past that data is part of the future of warfare, and that's a lot of why so many politicians are against, like, TikTok, for example. They want to ban it because of the data collection. The government has so much access to our data, the data of American citizens, and that's another fear with Chinese companies and their EVs coming here as well, not just undercutting the prices here in America. But I'm going to focus specifically on the pricing portion of it here without wading into the politics behind the governments and how they work together. And famously, BYD is already planning on expanding into Mexico. I did a video about that as well. And that's going to give them production ability to move straight into America and being part of NAFTA, being able to bypass many of the tariffs that are out there from other countries. But is BYD actually dumping their products in other markets in an attempt to gain market share? And are the subsidies actually supporting lower prices than they need to? Well, it's kind of a mixed picture, but I can say no with a gigantic warning at the end. So what I did was similar to what the Reuters article did, is I actually went and looked at Australia and Germany and the prices of 3 vehicles and tried to compare that with what they sell for in China. And then I took a second look at the subsidies that the Chinese actually give on their EVs. Now, famously, it's been thrown around, they give such massive, massive subsidies. That's why so much of their population has been moving to EVs. That's not entirely true, it turns out. They have a comprehensive, or had a comprehensive subsidy program to encourage people to buy EVs. And the last I looked is that in 2023, battery electric vehicles or new energy vehicles were about domestically produced, were about 23% of the Chinese new car sales. Massive, massive. They're selling about 6 million a year. In America, we're managing 1 million, something like that. But let's look at these 3 autos real quick and compare how their prices stack up. The big thing I have to say here is I couldn't get any information on the prices in China itself. The BYD China website is down. I went on Wayback Machine and it's been down for a few months now. So I couldn't get direct information there. And when I searched around at BYD press rooms and BYD newsrooms, there's no pricing information on what the domestic price is for these vehicles. The closest I could get was to go to Hong Kong. Now, I could have used some other resources, other news sources, but that would have been second, third-hand information, and I didn't want to do that. So we're just going to keep it the way it is right now. Now, let's look at 3 models. Number 1, the Dolphin. And I did try to pick the most basic model offered in each one of these marketplaces, but it's not necessarily rationalized based on equipment levels or battery size. It is just the most basic that they offer. The Dolphin in Hong Kong, converted to US dollars, is just under 23,000. In Australia, it's 25,400, and in Germany, it's $37,000. That shows a 10% and a 63% price increase over what they sell for in China. Next would be the Atto 3, $30,400, sold for $31,373 in Australia. Germany, nearly $43,000, giving a 3% and a 40% increase over that Hong Kong price. And then finally, the BYD Seal, priced at $34,478. In Australia, it actually sells for less at $32,600, and in Germany at $54,568. That's a negative 5.5% or 58% increase over that Hong Kong price. And I have a strong suspicion that the mainland China price might be a little lower, but I can't prove that. Now, what does this tell me? Well, they want to gain market share, and they are in an incredibly competitive environment in China. I actually read just the other day that China has over 200 different automakers at a time when sales are starting to slow and the economy is constricted a little bit. We're going to have a lot of shakeouts and consolidation in that market. And so they're looking to expand, not just BYD, but others, in order to boost up that cash flow and get the sales continuing to rise in a domestic market that is shrinking. But it doesn't look like they're dumping. It looks like they are doing what capitalists would do, which is shipping a car and then adjusting it to be competitive in the local marketplace. They're not dramatically undercutting it. Now, one part of this would be, well, maybe the price is actually artificially low in China due to government subsidies. And so this is just recognizing more of a rationalized level for where that price would be, that the list price already reflects that discount. I can't find any proof of that. Now, the Chinese subsidies are massive and complex, both at a federalized level, at a state level and a local level, and include not only manufacturers, but consumers and suppliers like your battery production. So it's hard to really pick apart, except for one thing, which is the Chinese level government, that federal level government, has been rolling back the subsidies since about 2019. They actually peaked when they were introduced about 2015 and have been dropping ever since. And so I started picking through what I could find. Excellent article over on ScienceDirect, very long and very complex. But the general gist of it is that the Chinese central government subsidies in late 2019 for the longest range tranche that they actually looked at was only $2,500 to you, the consumer. Now, the max it ever was would have been the equivalent of, for local subsidies, $12,700. That's nothing to sneeze at. But those have been phasing out. That is the max, the tippy top of a specific locality, and we're typically much lower than that. And again, they're being phased out, although they've slowed down the phase out a little bit as actually the BEV's market share penetration has been dropping. And so what that leads to is by 2023, domestically made sales, BEV market share, 23%. That's solid, about a quarter. But what I read here is their structure is very similar to what we're doing here in the US. And honestly, without picking through this in too much more detail, because this is not a science channel, it sounds very similar to our $7,500 rebates. It really does. But most of those local subsidies also included other benefits to, let's say, battery electric or plug-in hybrid or fuel cell vehicles, as a matter of fact. And it all varied depending on the locality itself. But they could receive things like toll exemptions, charging subsidies, parking fee relief, and a variety of other things to help make it beneficial to encourage people to buy those EVs. But what I'm hearing is that there is not, as far as I can find, a massive discount at the manufacturer level. And what I mean by that is, say they produce a $40,000 vehicle and they're like, we will give you $10,000 equivalent so that you can go sell it for 30, and then we'll give these other subsidies over here to bring up the market share penetration. I can't find that. It looks like there are subsidies on the manufacturing side and there are subsidies on the consumer side, but not this massive government-led buy down making these cars $15,000, $20,000. So what that leaves me with is the Chinese are just accepting it far more. It does look like, at least in some limited areas, the subsidies were dramatically higher than what we were doing here in America, probably on the range of about twice, plus other benefits. But China is an incredibly polluted country, and they're very, very self-conscious about it now, certainly since the Olympics they hosted, and they've been aggressively going after it. So while they continue to, the automotive sector is one of the biggest pollutants in the transportation sector, obviously. So while they continue to work on that, they're also transitioning to cleaner energy producing, moving away from coal, which will only make everything better if your primary goal of buying a car is to reduce your carbon output. And this leaves me with, well, I still think the Chinese manufacturers are a danger, but I am slightly relieved that they're not just massively subsidizing each and every one produced to push it out onto the market. I still have a concern about their data usage and whether there truly are any protections there. It's not a huge concern of mine, but it is in the back of my mind. And I think that when they do ultimately, because I believe it's inevitable, they build a factory, or multiple companies build factories in Mexico, and they come into the United States under their own name. Don't comment that Geely and Volvo are already here as Chinese companies. I know, and Polestar, that they're going to adjust their prices up to the market. I think they have an opportunity to come in with some of their less expensive vehicles that we just simply don't make here anymore overall. I think there's an excellent opportunity for them to come in that $20,000, $25,000 range, but I don't think we're going to see anything in the $15,000 range, for example. But what I think this leaves me with is, if they're moving into other markets and they're able to mark it up and adjust to the local marketplace and what the market will absorb. And of course, there are some transportation costs and certification costs and crash testing for each of these markets, of course. All of that has to be counted in as well. But if they're going to move in and they're going to adjust to the market, I can expect them to come to America and maybe be a slight discount. If a Tesla is 38, I could see a BYD coming here for 35, just to get a shoe in, a leg up on the marketplace. But what this does tell me, if these companies have got the backing of the federalized government, of the Chinese central government, there could be a price war backed by their government. Studying the past subsidies that have or are being phased out, studying what they're doing in other marketplaces, does not preclude them coming in and saying, we're going to give you essentially a bounty on every car you sell just to go get a foothold and take market share in the United States. It's still at the back of my mind, and it's still a concern for me. But looking at how one instance, 3 cars, and in 3 markets, what BYD is doing as they expand, not terribly afraid they're going to be, quote, dumping products onto the market. It looks like they're going to try to come in and play as a solid player. Again, it just doesn't preclude them coming in and doing something a little shady. And it doesn't mean just BYD. It could be almost any of those companies. I'll be interested to see how this play out. But most importantly, I hope you enjoyed this. If you have some research, some resources that I haven't been able to find that give a lot more detail, simplified hopefully, of what the central government in China does relative to the manufacturers and how they actually work with manufacturers both on the supply chain and the automobile manufacturers and how the money flows to them, Let me know in the comments below. I'd really like to read that, and I could see a follow-up video on this if I can find more information, but honestly, there's just not a lot out there. So I hope you liked it. Please thumbs up, like the video, let me know what you think below. Thanks for being here, y'all.